What if I told you that a simple coin, no bigger than a dime, could turn everything we thought we knew about history upside down? Buried in the soil of a quiet coastal site in Maine, this tiny artifact known as the Maine Penny holds a secret so explosive it challenges the very timeline of North America's past. Stamped with Norse markings, this coin doesn't belong where it was found. It whispers of Vikings roaming these shores centuries before Columbus ever set sail, a theory so tantalizing it blurs the line between myth and reality. Picture this, it's the late 1950s, and amateur archaeologists are sifting through the remnants of a Native American settlement at Naskeag Point. Their hands brush against something unexpected, a small, weathered silver disc. At first glance, it seems insignificant, but when experts take a closer look, their hearts race. The markings are unmistakable, a crude cross, a winding serpent design straight out of medieval Scandinavia. How did a Viking coin end up buried alongside Native American tools? Was it traded, lost, or left behind by Norse explorers who dared to sail farther than history remembers? This isn't just a story about a coin. It's a detective story, a puzzle that forces us to question the boundaries of the known world. For decades, scholars have argued over the Maine Penny's origins. Some say it's undeniable proof of Viking presence in North America long before the so-called discovery by European explorers. Others dismiss it as a fluke, a solitary object that somehow drifted far from its rightful place. But what if the truth is even more fascinating? What if this coin is just one piece of a larger, hidden narrative, one that rewrites the saga of how civilizations met, clashed, and connected across vast oceans? Strap in, because we're about to unravel a mystery that could reshape history as we know it. The story of the Maine Penny truly begins not in a grand excavation by seasoned experts, but in the hands of a passionate amateur. In 1957, Guy Mellgren, a local archaeology enthusiast, was carefully excavating the Goddard site, a well-documented Native American trading hub along Maine's rugged coast. The dig was methodical, uncovering tools, pottery, and other artifacts typical of the region's indigenous peoples. But then, nestled among stone blades and bone fragments, Mellgren's fingers closed around something entirely unexpected. A small, tarnished silver disc, barely the size of a modern dime, yet strangely foreign in this context. At first glance, the coin was unassuming, its surface worn smooth by centuries in the earth. But the faint outlines of a cross and what appeared to be a coiled serpent hinted at something far older and far more out of place than anything else at the site. Mellgren and his team initially assumed it might be a colonial-era artifact, perhaps dropped by early European settlers. But when they cleaned it further, the truth became harder to ignore. The design wasn't English, Spanish, or French. It bore the unmistakable hallmarks of Norse craftsmanship, strikingly similar to coins minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre in the late 11th century. What made this discovery so startling wasn't just the coin itself, but where it was found. The Goddard site was a bustling Native American trading center, active long before Columbus's voyage. The presence of a Viking-era artifact here suggested connections, or collisions between worlds that history textbooks had long kept separate. How did a Norse coin, likely minted around the year 1070, end up buried in a Native American settlement over 3,000 miles from its homeland? Was it carried by a lone Viking explorer venturing farther south than we ever imagined? Or did it pass through countless hands in a vast intercontinental trade network we're only beginning to understand? The Maine Penny didn't just defy expectations, it shattered them. In a single stroke, this tiny relic forced archaeologists to confront a tantalizing possibility that the threads of history were woven far more intricately than we'd ever dared to believe. When experts first laid eyes on the Maine Penny, their reactions swung between stunned disbelief and electrifying curiosity. Here was an artifact that simply didn't belong, a silver coin stamped with the unmistakable symbols of medieval Norway, yet unearthed thousands of miles from any known Viking settlement. The initial identification process was meticulous. Numismatists compared its design to known Norse coins, noting the distinctive geometric patterns and the crude cross, a hallmark of coins minted under King Olaf Kyrre. The serpentine figure coiled along the edge matched surviving examples from Norway's late 11th century currency. There was no mistaking it. This coin was Norse and it was old. Yet its very existence in a pre-Columbian Native American site defied logic. Archaeologists scrambled to reconcile the find with established history. Some dismissed it as a hoax or a modern contaminant, suggesting it might have been dropped by a collector or planted as a prank, but the coin's condition told a different story. Its edges were worn smooth, not from deliberate doctoring, but from centuries of circulation. Soil analysis confirmed it had lain undisturbed alongside indigenous artifacts for generations. This wasn't a stray trinket, it was part of the site's authentic layer, buried long before Europeans officially discovered the continent. The academic world split into factions. One camp, led by believers in Norse exploration beyond Vinland, saw the coin as smoking gun evidence of forgotten voyages. They pointed to sagas hinting at expeditions south of Newfoundland, where Leif Erikson's crew supposedly encountered unfamiliar peoples. Could Norse traders have ventured as far as Maine, exchanging silver for furs or other goods? The opposing camp remained skeptical. A single coin, they argued, wasn't enough to rewrite history. Without weapons, tools, or structural remains to corroborate Viking presence, the Maine penny could have arrived through indigenous trade networks, passed hand to hand over vast distances until it reached Naskig Point. The debate raged, but one thing was undeniable. The coin forced archaeologists to confront uncomfortable gaps in the narrative. Why had no other Norse artifacts turned up at the site? If Vikings had reached Maine, why leave so faint a trace? And if the coin arrived via trade, what did that say about the scale and sophistication of pre-Columbian exchange routes? The Maine penny became a riddle wrapped in enigma, a tiny object that refused to fit neatly into any textbook. It wasn't just a relic, it was a provocation, daring experts to question the boundaries of what they thought they knew. The design of the Maine penny isn't just a curiosity, it's a time capsule from a distant world. Turn it over in your mind's eye, and you'll see the hallmarks of Norse craftsmanship. A bold, uneven cross dominating one side, its arms stretching to the edges like something pulled straight from a Viking chisel. Below it, a serpent coils in a looping pattern, a motif echoing the intricate metalwork found in Scandinavian artifacts from the same era. This wasn't random decoration. Every detail was deliberate, a visual language meant to convey power, faith, and identity. These markings align perfectly with coins minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre, a ruler who presided over a period of stability and trade expansion in the late 11th century. Silver was the lifeblood of Viking commerce, and coins like this were more than currency, they were portable wealth, easily melted down for jewelry or traded in far-flung markets. The Maine penny's composition tells its own story. Made from roughly 80% silver and 20% copper, it matches the alloy used in Norse coinage of the time, a blend durable enough for circulation but valuable enough to hold its worth across borders. Unlike the uniform coins we use today, Viking money was often irregularly shaped, hammered by hand between dies. That's why the Maine penny isn't perfectly round. Its slightly uneven edges bear the marks of human hands, a tangible link to the artisan who struck it over 900 years ago. But here's what makes this coin extraordinary. It wasn't just lost in Scandinavia, it traveled. Coins like this typically circulated within Norse territories. Think modern-day Norway, Denmark, or Viking settlements in Iceland and Greenland. Finding one in North America is like discovering a Roman coin in ancient China. It defies the expected pathways of history. Scholars believe these coins might have been used as tribute, trade goods, or even gifts to forge alliances. Could a Norse trader have carried it west, offering it to indigenous peoples in exchange for furs or food? Or did it change hands countless times along a vast intercontinental network we're only beginning to map? What's striking is how ordinary this coin would have been in its original context. In the bustling markets of Bergen or Trondheim, it might have bought a loaf of bread or a measure of cloth. But here, in the soil of Maine, it became something else entirely, a whisper of explorers who may have ventured farther than the sagas recorded, a silent challenge to the boundaries we've drawn between worlds. The real magic of the Maine penny isn't just in its metal or design. It's in the questions it forces us to ask. If this little piece of silver crossed an ocean, what else might have traveled with it? And how many more stories are still buried, waiting to surface? For all its intrigue, the Maine Pennys Viking origins aren't without controversy. Skeptics raise a compelling question. Could this coin have arrived long after the Norse era, carried by later European traders? After all, the Goddard site was active well into the colonial period. Spanish, French, and English ships frequented these waters by the 1600s, often carrying old coins as ballast or curiosities. Some historians argue that a Norse coin could easily have been mixed into the cargo of a much later voyage, perhaps traded or lost by a European visitor centuries after it was minted. This theory gains traction when you consider the glaring absence of other Viking artifacts at Naskeag Point. If Norse explorers had truly reached Maine, wouldn't we expect to find more than a single coin? Where are the iron nails, the broken weapons, the telltale ruins of a settlement? The Goddard site yielded thousands of indigenous objects, stone tools, pottery, bone fragments, but nothing else distinctly Norse. A solitary coin feels like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture. Even at Elance Ox Meadows, the proven Viking site in Newfoundland, archaeologists uncovered sod houses, forged metal, and tools, evidence of a presence, not just a passing visit. But here's where the plot thickens. Soil analysis at the Goddard site placed the coin in a layer dated between 1280 and 1360, long before Columbus, and even before the earliest known European fishing expeditions to the region. If it arrived later, how did it sink so deep into undisturbed earth? Proponents of the Viking theory counter that trade networks among indigenous peoples were vast and sophisticated. A coin could have traveled from Newfoundland's Norse settlements down the coast over generations, passed hand to hand until it reached Maine. Yet that still leaves a frustrating gap. No other Norse objects made the journey. The debate reveals a deeper tension in archaeology. A single artifact, no matter how extraordinary, rarely rewrites history on its own. Without corroborating evidence, the Maine penny remains an enigma, a tantalizing maybe in a field built on certainty. It's a reminder that history isn't just about what we find, but about what we don't find. The silence of the soil can be as telling as the treasures it holds. So while the coin could point to Vikings in Maine, it could just as easily be a red herring, a whisper from the past that teases us with possibilities we can't yet prove. Not everyone is convinced the Maine penny tells a Viking story. Among the most persistent counterarguments is the possibility that the coin wasn't buried by ancient hands at all, but placed there much later, whether by accident or design. Could this so-called Viking relic be a modern intruder, a stray artifact that slipped into the wrong layer of history? Detractors point to the messy reality of archaeology. Sites are rarely pristine. Over centuries, storms, animal burrows, or even earlier amateur diggers could have disturbed the soil, allowing objects from different eras to mingle. The Goddard site, after all, saw activity long after the Norse era, well into the colonial period. A coin dropped by a 19th-century collector or tossed aside by a curious tourist might have settled into older layers, deceiving later excavators. Then there's the darker possibility, a deliberate hoax. The mid-20th century was rife with artifact forgers seeking fame or profit, and Norse memorabilia held a particular allure. Could someone have planted the coin to stir controversy or elevate the site's significance? It wouldn't be the first time. The infamous Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota in the late 1800s, was later exposed as a probable fake. But the Maine Penny lacks the usual red flags of a forgery. It's where patterns align with genuine circulation, not artificial aging. Soil samples show no signs of recent disturbance where it was found. And perhaps most tellingly, Guy Mellgren, the amateur who uncovered it, had no history of sensationalism or deceit. He was a meticulous record keeper, respected by professionals for his careful methods. Yet, even if the coin arrived innocently, its journey might still defy the Viking narrative. Some scholars propose it could have been part of a colonial-era curiosity cabinet, a collection of exotic objects European elites gathered as conversation pieces. Early settlers often brought old coins from their homelands as mementos. If one of these heirlooms was traded or lost near the Goddard site, natural processes might have buried it among much older indigenous artifacts, creating an illusion of ancient connection. But here's where science pushes back. Advanced dating techniques place the coin firmly within pre-Columbian layers, alongside artifacts radiocarbon dated to the 1300s. For the hoax theory to hold, a forger would have needed improbable foresight, planting a Norse coin in the exact spot future archaeologists would associate with indigenous trade, centuries before Europeans officially arrived. The odds strain credibility. What emerges is a puzzle with no easy solution. The hoax and misplacement theories aren't frivolous, they're necessary checks against overeager storytelling. Yet each time skeptics tug at the threads of the Maine Penny's origin, the evidence resists unraveling. This coin refuses to fit neatly into a box, whether labeled proof or hoax. Maybe that's its real power, not to give answers, but to keep us asking better questions. Long before the Maine Penny surfaced, the Goddard site thrived as a vital nexus of indigenous trade, a bustling coastal hub where the Penobscot people exchanged goods, stories, and technologies across generations. Nestled on Naskeag Point, this settlement was no accidental campsite, but a strategic node in a sprawling network that connected inland hunters with coastal fisherfolk. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of artifacts here, finely crafted stone blades, bone fishhooks, and pottery fragments, all whispering of a community deeply attuned to land and sea. The layers of soil tell a story of continuous occupation stretching back at least 2,000 years, with peak activity between the 12th and 14th centuries. This was a place where distant materials like Quebec chert and Labrador copper appeared alongside local tools, proof of trade routes spanning hundreds of miles. Against this backdrop, the sudden appearance of a Norse coin feels like finding a smartphone in a medieval castle. The Penobscot were masterful traders, but their networks were continental, not transatlantic. While they exchanged goods with the Micmac and other coastal nations, who in turn had sporadic contact with Norse settlers in Newfoundland, no other European artifacts from this era have surfaced at the Goddard site. Viking expeditions, even at their boldest, never left traces of sustained contact this far south. Elance Ork's Meadows, the only confirmed Norse site in North America, lies over 1,000 miles northeast with no evidence of expansion toward Maine. The sagas mention fleeting encounters with indigenous peoples, but those stories center on Vinland, modern-day Newfoundland, where grapes grew wild and the climate was harsher. What makes the Goddard site especially unlikely as a Viking outpost is its cultural fingerprint. Every recovered artifact aligns with Wabanaki traditions. The arrowheads match regional hunting styles, the pottery bears distinctive Penobscot decorative patterns, and the food remains shell middens packed with clam and mussel shells reflect a diet rooted in local estuaries. There are no Norse longhouses, no iron rivets, no telltale signs of European animals like rats or mice that typically accompanied medieval explorers. Even the settlement's layout, oval wigwams arranged around central hearths, is textbook Wabanaki with no Scandinavian influence. This isn't just about absence, though. The Penobscot's trading practices reveal why a single foreign coin might surface without broader Viking contact. Indigenous networks moved objects astonishingly far: obsidian from Wyoming, copper from Lake Superior, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, all through relay-style exchanges where goods passed hand to hand over years or decades. A Norse coin could have traveled a similar path, hopping from Greenland to Labrador, then southward through indigenous trade circles until it reached Maine. In this light, the Maine Penny isn't proof of Vikings on the coast, it's evidence of the Penobscot's far-reaching connections, a testament to how even the smallest object could cross cultural chasms without direct contact. The real mystery, then, isn't how Vikings reached Maine, it's how a fragment of their world slipped quietly into the hands of people who likely never saw a Norse ship. The Goddard site story was never about outsiders. It was about a thriving indigenous economy so vast and interconnected that a silver coin from across the ocean became just another curiosity in the rich tapestry of trade. The contrast between the Maine Penny and the Viking settlement at Elance Aux Meadows couldn't be starker. At the northern tip of Newfoundland, Elance Aux Meadows stands as the only undisputed proof of Norse presence in North America. A cluster of low, grassy mounds hiding the outlines of sod-walled longhouses, their foundations still studded with iron nails and charcoal from ancient hearths. Here, archaeologists unearthed a treasure trove of Viking life: a bronze cloak pin, a stone spindle whorl for spinning wool, even a small wooden carving that might have been a child's toy. These weren't stray objects lost to time. They were the debris of a functioning settlement, proof that Norse families lived, worked, and perhaps even wintered on these shores around the year 1000. Now compare that to the Maine Penny's lonely cameo. At the Goddard site, there are no longhouses, no tools, no signs of European habitation, just a single silver disc adrift in a sea of indigenous artifacts. Elance Aux Meadows paints a picture of a community with artifacts numbering in the thousands. The Maine Penny is a whisper, a fleeting anomaly with no supporting cast. Even the smallest Viking outpost left behind more than a coin: broken pottery, animal bones, evidence of metalworking. But in Maine, the soil holds none of these telltale markers. The difference speaks volumes about the nature of these two encounters. Elance Aux Meadows was a foothold, however brief. The sagas describe it as a base for expeditions, a place where Leif Erikson's crew felled timber and repaired ships before pushing onward. The Maine Penny, by contrast, hints at something far more ephemeral. If Vikings did reach coastal Maine, they left no footprint, no settlements, no burials, no cultural exchange beyond this one tiny artifact. It's the difference between a postcard and a permanent address. But here's the twist: absence of evidence isn't always evidence of absence. Elance Aux Meadows survived centuries because it was built on peat, which preserved organic materials. Maine's acidic soils devour wood and cloth, leaving little behind. Could a Viking campsite there have vanished without a trace? Possibly. Yet even if the Maine Penny represents a fleeting visit, it challenges the narrative that Norse exploration was confined to the far north. The sagas mention lands beyond Vinland, places like Markland, a forested coast that could match parts of New England. Could the Maine Penny be a physical clue to those lost chapters? The truth may lie somewhere in between. Elance Aux Meadows proves the Norse could cross the Atlantic. The Maine Penny suggests they, or their possessions, might have traveled farther than we thought. But until another smoking gun emerges, these two sites remain bookends to a mystery. One a confirmed Viking chapter, the other a tantalizing footnote waiting to be deciphered. Imagine a Viking trader in Greenland handing a silver coin to a hunter from the distant north, not as payment, but as a curiosity. That hunter, in turn, passes it to a relative heading south for the seasonal gatherings along the St. Lawrence River. From there, it changes hands again, traveling with a Micmac trader down the coast, carried in a pouch alongside shell beads and copper ornaments. By the time it reaches the hands of a Penobscot elder at Naskeek Point, the coin's origin story has faded, leaving only its exotic allure. This could be the journey of the Maine Penny, a whisper of how objects traveled vast distances long before European ships ever mapped these shores. Indigenous trade networks in pre-Columbian North America were anything but simple barter systems. They formed intricate webs of exchange stretching from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico, moving goods across thousands of miles through relay-style transactions. Objects didn't just travel, they transformed in meaning with each handoff. A Norse coin, worthless as currency outside its homeland, might have been prized as a decorative charm or a shard of rare metal to be melted into jewelry. We know this because other far-flung artifacts followed similar paths. Labrador copper reached Ohio, while Appalachian mica turned up in Great Lakes burial sites. The Maine Penny fits this pattern perfectly, a single outlier in a vast system we're only beginning to trace, but here's where the story gets even more fascinating. The Wabanaki peoples of coastal Maine weren't passive recipients of distant goods, they were active participants in a maritime trading culture that predated European contact by centuries. Their birchbark canoes, swift and seaworthy, linked communities from Nova Scotia to Massachusetts. Annual gatherings at key sites like the Goddard place became hubs where news, rituals, and objects circulated. A Norse coin arriving here wouldn't need a Viking ship to explain its presence, just one curious traveler slotting it into an existing flow of exchange. The sagas themselves hint at this possibility. In the Greenlander's saga, Norse explorers described tense trades with indigenous peoples they called skraelings, who offered furs and pelts in exchange for cloth and milk. While these encounters happened in Newfoundland, they prove that Norse goods did enter indigenous hands. It's not hard to envision a scenario where a single coin, perhaps left behind as a trinket or lost in a skirmish, began its long coastal migration. What makes this theory compelling isn't just its plausibility, it's the way it reshapes our understanding of pre-Columbian connectivity. The Maine Penny might not be proof of Vikings in Maine, but it is evidence of something equally remarkable, a continent where distance was no barrier to the movement of ideas and objects. In a world without maps or written records, this little silver disc crossed oceans and cultures, bridging worlds that history would later try to keep apart. Its true story isn't about who lost it, but about the hands that carried it and the invisible highways of trade that made such journeys possible. The Viking sagas speak of lands beyond the edge of the known world, places of towering forests, wild grapes, and strange peoples encountered by Norse explorers venturing ever westward. These ancient texts, the Greenlander's saga and the saga of Eric the Red, describe in vivid detail the exploits of Leif Erikson and his crew as they pushed beyond Greenland's icy shores around the year 1000. They called these newfound territories Vinland, a name inspired by the grapevines they claimed to find there. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as legend until archaeologists uncovered the ruins of a Norse settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, proving the sagas held kernels of truth. But the sagas don't end with Vinland. They hint at voyages even farther south into regions where the climate grew milder and the coastline unfurled in ways that could easily describe New England. One account tells of Thorvald Eriksson, Leif's brother, who sailed down the coast until his crew encountered indigenous peoples in canoes, an encounter that turned fatal when the Norse attacked first, only to be chased away by a flurry of arrows. Another passage describes a voyage led by Thorfinn Karlsefni, who attempted to establish a settlement but retreated after skirmishes with locals. These fragments suggest the Norse didn't just stumble upon North America, They explored it, mapped it, and ultimately found it too dangerous to hold. This is where the Maine Penny becomes electrifying. If the sagas are right, if Norse ships truly ranged as far south as New England's dense forests and rocky inlets, then this humble coin could be physical proof of those forgotten expeditions. Imagine a Viking trader anchoring off the coast of Maine, bartering silver for furs or fresh water. Or picture a Norse explorer losing a coin during a hasty retreat, leaving it to be buried by time. The penny's design, dating to King Olaf's reign in the late 11th century, aligns perfectly with the era when Greenland's Norse settlements were at their peak, sending out ships to gather timber and other resources from the New World. Yet the sagas also leave maddening gaps. They mention no settlements south of Newfoundland, no names for lands beyond Vinland, and no records of silver coins changing hands. This silence fuels skepticism. Could the Maine penny have arrived through indigenous trade networks, as some argue, without any Norse presence in the region? Or does its existence hint at voyages so fleeting, so ill-fated, that they left no mark beyond a single discarded coin? The sagas give us a framework, but the penny refuses to fit neatly within it, dangling instead like a clue to a story half told, daring us to read between the lines. What's tantalizing is how the coin's timeline intersects with Norse history. By the late 11th century, Greenland's settlements were thriving, but their ships still depended on risky crossings to fetch timber from Vinland. A storm could easily blow a vessel off course, sending it plummeting down the coast toward milder latitudes. Explorers might have ventured south deliberately, seeking new resources or safer harbors. The Maine penny could be a relic of one such journey, a tangible echo of a voyage the sagas never recorded, either because it ended in disaster or because those who survived chose to forget. After all, the Norse weren't chronicling history for posterity. They were spinning tales of glory and survival. A failed expedition to hostile shores might have been deliberately omitted, its only memorial a silver disc buried in foreign soil. The interplay between saga and artifact is what makes the Maine penny so compelling. It's not just a coin, it's a cipher offering a chance to test myth against reality. Every scratch on its surface could represent a story lost to time, a moment of contact, a gesture of trade, or a panicked flight. Until more evidence emerges, the penny remains suspended between two worlds, the vivid narratives of the sagas and the silent testimony of the earth, each daring us to believe in journeys bolder than history remembers. The silver disc discovered at the Goddard site didn't just look Norse, it had the scientific receipts to prove it. When researchers subjected the Maine penny to metallurgical analysis, the results were unequivocal. The coin's composition matched known 11th century Norse minting practices, with a blend of roughly 80% silver and 20% copper, a signature alloy used in Scandinavian coins of the period. High-tech tools like X-ray fluorescence spectrometry revealed trace elements that further pinpointed its origin, showing minute amounts of lead and bismuth consistent with ores mined in medieval Norway. This wasn't just a coin that resembled Viking currency. Its very molecules whispered of northern European forges and royal stamping houses under King Olaf's rule. Yet the real smoking gun lay in its surface. Under microscopes, the penny's patina told a story of centuries spent in motion. Unlike modern forgeries, which often show uniform aging from chemical baths, the coin exhibited microscopic pitting and uneven oxidation, the hallmarks of long, natural wear. Its edges were softly rounded, not from deliberate sanding, but from generations of hands passing it across market stalls or weighing it in merchants' pouches. Most tellingly, the recessed areas of the design, like the serpent's coiled body, retained deeper oxidation while the raised cross showed more abrasion. This pattern fit perfectly with authentic circulation wear, where friction smooths high points over time while protected crevices tarnish undisturbed. Soil samples clinging to the coin added another layer of proof. Geochemical analysis revealed traces of Maine's coastal clays embedded in its crevices, chemically distinct from Scandinavian soils. These particles weren't surface contaminants. They'd bonded with the silver over centuries of burial, confirming the penny spent its final years, if not centuries, in American earth. Even the corrosion products on its surface, a mix of silver chloride and sulfide, aligned with the site's brackish groundwater chemistry, ruling out recent planting. Critics who suggested the coin might be a later colonial-era import faced a scientific dead end. Colonial coins from the 16 and 1700s had vastly different metallurgical profiles, often with higher copper content or added alloys like tin. None matched the Maine Penny's signature blend, and while medieval coins did occasionally circulate as curiosities in later centuries, there were patterns typically showed abrupt transitions, sharp edges from centuries of storage suddenly meeting fresh scratches from modern handling. The Maine Penny's gradual, all-over erosion spoke of continuous use before its final rest in pre-Columbian soil. Perhaps most compelling was the absence of red flags that plague so many alleged Viking artifacts. No modern tool marks, no anachronistic polishing, no telltale signs of electrolytic aging, a common forgery technique. Instead, every test pointed to an authentic medieval object that crossed the Atlantic not in a collector's cabinet, but in the hands of someone who saw it as valuable. Whether that someone wore a Norse tunic or a Wabanaki cloak, science can't yet say, but the coin itself, its Viking pedigree, is ironclad. Determining exactly when the Maine Penny found its way into the soil of Naskeag Point is where archaeology turns detective. The Goddard site's layers tell a story, one written in charcoal, shell fragments, and centuries of accumulated earth. When researchers examined the stratigraphy, the vertical sequence of soil layers, they found the coin nestled in a dense stratum of artifacts dating to the late 13th or early 14th century. This wasn't a surface-level intrusion. It lay deep among stone tools, fire-cracked rock, and midden deposits rich with clam and mussel shells, all sealed beneath undisturbed layers of sediment. Radiocarbon dating of nearby charcoal samples pinned this layer to between 1280 and 1360, a time frame that places the coin firmly in the pre-Columbian era. But stratigraphy is more than just a timeline, it's a snapshot of daily life. The layer where the penny was found showed no signs of disturbance, no telltale mixing of older and newer materials. This wasn't a hole dug by later settlers or a burrow carved by animals. The coin's resting place was pristine, surrounded by artifacts from a single cultural period, the late Moorhead phase of Wabanaki history. That consistency is crucial. If the penny had been introduced later, say, by European fishermen in the 1500s, it would have left a visible scar in the soil, a disruption cutting through older layers. Instead, it sat quietly among objects that hadn't moved for generations, like a guest who'd arrived at the party on time and never left. Yet some skeptics argue that radiocarbon dates aren't infallible. Could a later intrusion have gone undetected? It's possible, but unlikely. The Goddard site's soil chemistry betrayed no such tampering. Coastal Maine's acidic earth is unforgiving, quickly breaking down organic matter but preserving inorganic objects like stone and metal. If someone had buried the coin in historic times, traces of root disturbance or tool marks would linger. Instead, the penny's corrosion patterns matched its neighbor's centuries of slow oxidation in contact with indigenous hearths and shellfish-rich middens. Even the corrosion products on its surface, a mix of silver chloride and sulfide, aligned perfectly with the site's brackish groundwater, a detail impossible to fake. The most compelling counterargument hinges on trade, not time. Even if the coin arrived before Columbus, could it have been traded from a Norse settlement centuries after it was minted? Silver doesn't decay, and old coins often circulated for generations. A penny struck in Norway around 1070 might still be valuable in Greenland 200 years later, and from there perhaps traded south. But here's the catch. By the late 13th century, Greenland's Norse colonies were in decline, their ties to Europe fraying. Would they have been trading silver coins eastward when they struggled to secure basic supplies? The timing feels off. What's left is a coin that defies easy explanation. The Earth says it arrived before Europeans officially discovered the continent. The metal says it came from a Norse mint, and the absence of any other Viking artifacts whispers that its journey, whether by Viking hand or indigenous trade, was as fleeting as it was extraordinary. The Maine Penny doesn't just challenge timelines, it forces us to reconsider how objects move through time and space, leaving puzzles in their wake. For the Wabanaki people, the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac nations whose ancestors walked Naskeag Point long before European contact, the Maine Penny isn't just an archaeological oddity. It's a tangible thread connecting their oral traditions to a deeper, more complex history than textbooks acknowledge. Tribal elders speak of ancestors who traded with distant peoples, exchanging furs for exotic materials that traveled unimaginable distances. The penny fits into this living memory not as proof of Viking visitors, but as evidence of their forebears' vast trade networks that span the continent. Modern Wabanaki scholars often frame the coin differently than academic archaeologists. Where scientists debate Norse presence, tribal historians see a reflection of indigenous agency, a reminder that their ancestors were active participants in transcontinental exchange, not passive recipients of European influence. Oral histories tell of coastal gatherings where goods from faraway lands changed hands, copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from the Rockies, and perhaps even silver from across the sea. The penny's journey, whether through Viking hands or indigenous trade routes, underscores a truth often erased from colonial narratives. Native economies were dynamic, interconnected, and sophisticated long before outsiders arrived. Some tribal voices caution against overemphasis on the coin's European origins. Focusing on where it came from misses the point, says Passamaquoddy historian Guy Mellgren. What matters is where it ended up, in our homeland, among our ancestors' belongings. That tells us more about them than about Vikings. For many Wabanaki people, the penny's real significance lies in how it reflects their ancestors' curiosity and adaptability. A foreign object didn't disrupt their culture. It was absorbed into it, repurposed, or perhaps revered as a spiritual talisman. Contemporary artists and storytellers have reclaimed the coin's narrative. Penobscot poet Cheryl Savageau imagines the moment it arrived, not carried by longships but passed palm to palm, a wonder from the north, traded for sweetgrass or shell beads. This perspective flips the script. Instead of centering Norse explorers, it highlights Wabanaki trade routes as the continent's true highways of exchange. The penny becomes not an outlier, but one of countless objects that moved through indigenous hands, each with a story now waiting to be retold. The debate over the Maine penny's origins often drowns out a more profound question. What did it mean to the people who kept it? Wabanaki oral traditions speak of a time when strange materials occasionally entered their world, carried by travelers or spirits. Some elders suggest such objects were seen as gifts from the spirit world, perhaps used in ceremonies or buried as offerings. Others posit it might have been a curiosity, stored away like the Roman coins found in ancient Japanese tombs, proof not of invasion but of trade's astonishing reach. In tribal museums today, the penny is sometimes displayed alongside indigenous artifacts, not as a Viking relic but as a Wabanaki one, a reminder that its final resting place matters as much as its origin. This quiet shift in perspective challenges us to rethink not just a coin's journey, but who gets to write the history of these shores. The Maine penny's greatest lesson might be this: objects don't belong solely to those who made them, but to those who carried them forward, weaving them into the fabric of their own story. The moment the Maine penny entered the public eye, something peculiar happened. Facts blurred into fantasies, and a single artifact became the star of sensational headlines claiming Vikings conquered Maine, or proof of Norse settlements unearthed. Never mind that archaeology rarely deals in such absolutes. Here was a story too thrilling to resist. The coin became a Rorschach test, reflecting whatever narrative its beholders wanted to see. But beneath the hype lies a crucial distinction between what the penny could suggest and what it actually proves. Consider the most persistent myth, that this coin confirms a Viking settlement in coastal Maine. It doesn't. One artifact, no matter how out of place, can't shoulder that weight. Imagine finding a single Roman coin in a field in Scotland. You wouldn't declare it proof of a lost Roman city. You'd assume it arrived through trade, war, or accident. The same logic applies here. At Meadows, archaeologists uncovered entire longhouses, forging pits, and personal items. The Maine Penny, by contrast, floats in isolation, devoid of the cultural debris that accompanies human habitation. Yet media outlets often skip this nuance. In the 1970s, newspapers breathlessly described the coin as smoking gun, evidence of Norse expansion. Never mind that even its discoverer, Guy Mellgren, cautioned against overinterpretation. The allure of Vikings, those horn-helmeted adventurers, overshadowed simpler explanations. Lost in the noise was a key truth. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. A single coin is intriguing, but it's not a settlement, a shipwreck, or even a second artifact to keep it company. Then there's the myth of the lost Viking colony. Some theorists, seizing on the penny's existence, proposed elaborate scenarios of Norse villages dotting the New England coast. But archaeology has yet to find so much as a Viking nail or tool fragment in Maine. Contrast this with Newfoundland, where Norse artifacts cluster at Meadows, or Iceland, where entire farms preserve Viking-era layers. The absence speaks volumes. If Vikings had settled in Maine, they'd have left more than pocket change. Perhaps the most pervasive exaggeration is the idea that the penny rewrote history overnight. Textbooks weren't shredded, academic consensus didn't collapse. Instead, scholars did what scholars do. They debated, tested, and remained skeptical until more evidence emerged. The coin became a footnote, not a chapter, in the story of Norse exploration. This isn't to diminish its significance, but to place it in context. Anomalies exist to challenge assumptions, not confirm preconceptions. The danger of sensationalism isn't just that it distorts the past, it steals focus from the penny's real mystery. However it arrived, the coin testifies to the astonishing distances objects could travel, whether clutched in a Viking trader's palm or passed through indigenous networks spanning continents. That's the quieter, richer story, not of conquest but of connection. A narrative where a silver disc from Norway becomes a curiosity in Wabanaki hands isn't less compelling than a Viking camp, it's more human. It reminds us that history's most fascinating journeys aren't always about who planted a flag, but about how small, ordinary things slip across boundaries, carrying stories we're still learning to hear. Today, most archaeologists and historians agree on one thing: the Maine penny is the real deal. The coin's Norse origin isn't up for debate. The metallurgy, the craftsmanship, the wear patterns, they all scream 11th century Scandinavia. But here's where consensus splinters. While the artifact itself is authentic, its journey to Maine is anything but settled, the dominant view among scholars. This coin didn't arrive with a Viking ship anchored off the coast. Instead, it likely hitchhiked its way south through indigenous trade networks, passing from hand to hand over generations until it reached the Wabanaki people at Naskeag Point. The reasoning behind this trade theory is both simple and profound. Isolated finds don't equal settlements. Archaeologists have a mantra: one artifact is an anomaly, two is a pattern. And at the Goddard site, the Maine penny stands alone. There are no Norse tools, no Viking DNA in nearby burials, no sagas mentioning expeditions to Maine's foggy shores. Compare that to Meadows, where excavations revealed everything from iron forges to butternuts, proof of a community, not just a stray visitor. Without that kind of corroborating evidence, claiming Vikings reached Maine based on a single coin would be like finding a Spanish doubloon in a Florida swamp and declaring it proof of conquistadors building castles there. But the trade explanation isn't just about absence, it's about presence. Indigenous trade routes in pre-Columbian North America were staggeringly vast. We know copper from Lake Superior reached the Gulf Coast, and obsidian from Wyoming made it to Ohio. Against this backdrop, a Norse coin traveling from Newfoundland to Maine feels less like a fluke and more like business as usual. Coastal Algonquian peoples like the Mi'kmaq had well-documented interactions with Norse settlers in Vinland, trading furs for milk and cloth. It's not hard to imagine a silver penny, shiny and exotic, slipping into those exchanges as a curiosity or a gift, then migrating south through established networks. The Wabanaki didn't need to meet Vikings to own a Viking artifact. They just needed to know someone who knew someone who did. That said, a vocal minority of scholars still entertains the possibility of a Norse voyage to Maine, not as colonists but as explorers. They point to sagas describing lands beyond Vinland, places with warmer climates and longer coastlines. Could a ship blown off course have ventured south, leaving behind nothing but a lost coin? It's not impossible. Norse navigators were daring, and their Norse ships could handle open ocean. But even these researchers admit, without more evidence, it's speculation. As one historian put it, the Maine Penny is a door cracked open, not a door kicked down. What's fascinating is how this debate reflects a bigger shift in archaeology. Gone are the days when every foreign artifact was assumed to mark the footsteps of explorers. Today, scholars are more likely to credit indigenous agency, to see objects like the Maine Penny as testaments to native trade systems' reach, not just European mobility. The coin's real story might not be about who lost it, but about who kept it. Wabanaki ancestors didn't just stumble upon a Viking relic. They chose to carry it, trade it, or maybe even treasure it. That distinction matters. It turns a passive accident of history into an active thread in a much richer tapestry, one where the movement of a single silver disc speaks volumes about the connected world that thrived long before Columbus set sail. The Maine Penny isn't the only artifact that sparked fiery debates about Vikings in North America. Take the Beardmore relics, a cache of Norse weapons allegedly discovered in Ontario in the 1930s. A prospector named James Edward Dodd claimed he unearthed a rusted Viking sword, an axe head, and a broken shield boss near Lake Nipigon. The artifact seemed legit at first glance, matching the style of 10th century Norse weaponry. But skepticism crept in when inconsistencies surfaced. Dodd's story kept shifting. First, he said he found them near his cabin, then buried under tree roots. Even more damning, the relics bore no signs of centuries in Canadian soil. Their rust patterns looked suspiciously fresh, as if they'd been recently exposed to moisture, not slowly oxidized over 1,000 years. By the 1950s, the truth emerged. The artifacts were likely planted, possibly acquired from a Scandinavian immigrant's collection. The Beardmore saga became a cautionary tale about how easily enthusiasm can outpace evidence. Then there's the Kensington runestone, perhaps the most infamous Viking artifact in North America. Found in Minnesota in 1898 by a Swedish farmer, the stone bore a message carved in runes, supposedly detailing a Norse expedition in the year 1362. The inscription spoke of explorers fleeing a massacre, their words etched into rock for posterity. For decades, the stone divided scholars. Some insisted the runes were genuine, pointing to linguistic quirks that matched medieval Norse. Others noted glaring errors, carvings that looked too crisp, grammar that felt off. Modern analysis delivered the final blow. The runestone's tool marks showed no weathering consistent with 6 centuries in the elements. Instead, they matched late 19th century chisels, the smoking gun, a scrap of paper found in the discoverer's belongings, a draft of the inscription in his own handwriting. What makes the Maine Penny different and far more credible is the absence of red flags. Unlike the Beardmore relics, its metallurgy and wear patterns align perfectly with authentic medieval coins. And unlike the Kensington runestone, its discovery wasn't tied to a lone individual with a dubious story. The penny surfaced during a documented excavation, surrounded by pre-Columbian artifacts in undisturbed soil. No one stood to gain fame or fortune from its discovery. In fact, its finder, Guy Mellgren, was openly cautious about drawing grand conclusions. Yet these controversies share a common thread: the human hunger for connection to epic narratives. The Beardmore relics and Kensington runestone tapped into a desire to believe in daring Viking explorers penetrating deep into the continent. The Maine Penny, by contrast, offers a quieter but more plausible story, one where objects move not through conquest but through curiosity and trade. It's a reminder that history's most enduring mysteries aren't always about heroes and legends. Sometimes they're about small, ordinary things that traveled extraordinary distances, carrying whispers of worlds we're still learning to understand. If the Maine Penny truly arrived in North America through Norse hands rather than indigenous trade routes, its presence on the coast of Maine throws open a tantalizing question: how far south did Viking explorers actually venture? The sagas describe Vinland as a region rich in grapes and timber features that align more closely with New England than Newfoundland's rugged shores. Could Maine's dense forests and milder climate have been part of that fabled land? Archaeological evidence from Elance Ork's Meadows proves the Norse reached Newfoundland, but the Maine Penny hints at journeys stretching hundreds of miles farther into territories never mentioned in the sagas. Imagine a Norse ship, its square sail catching the wind as it skirts southward past Nova Scotia's rocky headlands. The crew, seasoned by years of Atlantic crossings, might have sought new resources: lumber for Greenland's treeless settlements, fresh water, or even contact with unfamiliar peoples. The sagas mention sporadic trade and violent clashes with indigenous groups, but they're frustratingly vague about geography. A place called Hop, described as a sheltered lagoon with tidal flats, could match parts of Maine's coastline. If Vikings did sail this far, they wouldn't have needed to establish permanent settlements to leave traces. A single trading stop or winter camp could explain the coin's presence without requiring a full-scale colony. Yet the absence of other Norse artifacts in the region is hard to ignore. At Elance Ork's Meadows, the Vikings left behind nails, tools, and butternut shells, evidence of sustained activity. Maine's acidic soils are less forgiving, but even so, metal objects like arrowheads and copper ornaments from indigenous cultures have survived. If Vikings spent enough time in the area to lose a coin, why haven't we found a single belt buckle or broken blade? One possibility is that their visits were fleeting exploratory voyages that never led to long-term stays. A ship blown off course might have anchored briefly, traded with locals, and departed without leaving the usual archaeological breadcrumbs. The penny's late 11th century mint date adds another layer of intrigue. By this time, Greenland's Norse settlements were well established, and their need for timber would have been acute. Voyages to Markland, likely Labrador, for lumber are documented, but the sagas hint at lands beyond. Could Maine's towering oaks and pines have drawn them farther south? The coin's design suggests it was minted during a period of relative stability under King Olaf Kyrre, when Norwegian trade networks were expanding. If it traveled west with a Greenland-bound ship, it might have been carried south by explorers testing the limits of Vinland's bounty. But here's the twist: the penny might not reflect deliberate exploration at all. Norse ships were sturdy, but storms could send them wildly off course. A vessel bound for Newfoundland might have been driven south to Maine's shores, its crew losing or trading the coin during a desperate bid for survival. The sagas are filled with tales of such misfortunes, ships vanishing into the mist, only to reappear in unexpected places. The Maine Penny could be a relic of one such accidental journey, a silent witness to a voyage gone awry. The most compelling argument against Maine as part of Vinland is the lack of corroborating evidence. Without ruins, tools, or written records, the coin remains a solitary clue. Yet history is full of discoveries that started with a single anomaly. For now, the penny dangles like a question mark over the map of Norse exploration, challenging us to reconsider how far their ambition or their misfortunes might have carried them. Whether it's proof of a deliberate voyage or a storm-tossed accident, this tiny piece of silver keeps the door open to possibilities we're only beginning to explore. Not every scholar is ready to dismiss the idea of Vikings walking Maine's shores. A vocal minority of researchers insists the Maine penny represents more than just a fluke of long-distance trade. It could be physical proof of Norse explorers venturing far beyond their known territories. Their arguments hinge on three compelling pieces of circumstantial evidence that challenge the mainstream narrative. First, there's the saga of Thorfinn Karlsefni. While most focus on his failed settlement attempt in Vinland, fewer pay attention to passages describing his crew's journey southward along the coast, where they encountered milder climates and unfamiliar peoples. The descriptions of tidal estuaries and dense forests align eerily with Maine's geography. Could Karlsefni's expedition have pushed farther than historians assume? Proponents point to the penny's mint date within decades of his voyage as potential corroboration. A coin lost or traded during such an expedition might explain its presence without requiring a permanent settlement. Then there's the oceanographic angle. Norse ships were built for open water crossings, but their shallow drafts also allowed them to navigate North America's intricate coastlines with surprising ease. Maritime archaeologists note that Maine's sheltered bays and abundant fresh water would have made ideal stopovers for explorers repairing ships or resupplying. A storm-blown vessel could have anchored briefly, leaving behind the penny as the sole trace of its passage. Unlike deliberate trade, which would likely involve multiple objects, accidental loss fits the pattern of a single, out-of-place artifact. The most provocative evidence, however, comes from outside archaeology. In the 1960s, a team of botanists studying Maine's coastal ecosystems made an odd discovery: patches of Rosa rugosa, a hardy rose species native to northern Europe, thriving in rocky outcrops near Penobscot Bay. Genetic testing confirmed these plants weren't modern introductions but centuries-old growths, their seeds likely carried across the Atlantic before Columbus. While skeptics argue seabirds or driftwood could explain their presence, the rose's concentration near sheltered inlets precisely where Vikings would have sought anchorage fuels speculation. Could Norse explorers have inadvertently brought these plants, just as they did to Greenland and Iceland? Of course, these theories remain speculative. Without a shipwreck, a second coin, or definitive structural remains, the penny's origin story stays open to debate. But the dissenting scholars raise a fair point: absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The archaeological record is fragmentary, and coastal erosion may have swallowed other clues whole. As one researcher put it, "We don't dig up history, we dig up what's left of it." The Maine penny's true significance may lie not in answering questions, but in keeping them alive, reminding us that the past always holds room for surprises. Walk into the Maine State Museum in Augusta, and you'll find the Maine penny displayed not as a footnote, but as a star attraction encased in glass under carefully calibrated lighting, its silver surface catching the eye amid artifacts from the state's indigenous and colonial past. The exhibit doesn't shout about Viking conquests or lost colonies. Instead, it poses quiet, deliberate questions. How did this get here? What does it mean? The penny's label offers no definitive answers, inviting visitors to wrestle with the same mysteries that have kept scholars debating for decades. This isn't just museum theater. It's a masterclass in how to present ambiguity without undermining significance. The coin's humble size belies its gravitational pull. It's the kind of object that makes children press their noses to the glass and adults linger, caught between wonder and skepticism. Beyond the museum walls, the Maine Penny has taken on a life of its own in popular culture. It's appeared in documentaries like PBS's Nova and the History Channel's Vikings Unearthed, where dramatic reenactments show weathered Norse traders bartering with indigenous peoples under stormy skies. These portrayals often lean into the romance of the unknown, splicing aerial shots of Maine's rugged coastline with CGI longships cutting through fog. But the penny's real power lies in its refusal to conform to easy storytelling. In one episode of Expedition Unknown, host Josh Gates holds a replica under the glow of a flashlight, his voice dropping to a whisper as he admits, "This little coin could rewrite history, or it could just remind us how much we don't know." That tension between revelation and mystery is what makes the artifact so irresistible to filmmakers and audiences alike. The coin's cultural footprint extends to literature, too. Its name dropped in novels like The Viking's Apprentice, where it fuels fictional treasure hunts, and cited in alternative history blogs that speculate about secret Norse maps or forgotten outposts. Even the gaming world hasn't resisted its allure. The penny appears as a collectible item in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, tucked into a virtual version of the Goddard site. This crossover into fiction and fantasy says something revealing about how we grapple with historical ambiguity. When facts are scarce, imagination rushes in, turning the penny into a blank canvas for everything from scholarly theories to wild conspiracy yarns. Yet the most fascinating reactions come from visitors to the museum itself. Watch long enough and you'll see the full spectrum of human response. A child insisting it's pirate treasure, a history buff muttering about hoaxes, a Wabanaki elder nodding as if the coin confirms stories passed down for generations. The museum's guestbook is filled with theories scribbled in margins, proof of Leif Erikson's secret voyage, maybe a trader carried it south, aliens. That last one pops up more than you'd expect. The penny's genius is its ability to meet people where they are, offering conspiracy theorists a crumb of doubt and academics a puzzle to solve, all while reminding us that history isn't a locked door, it's a conversation, always open to new voices and interpretations. What's striking is how the Maine Penny bridges worlds. In indigenous communities, it sparks discussions about pre-colonial trade networks. In Scandinavian cultural festivals, it's toasted as a symbol of Viking daring. And in academic circles, it's a case study in how artifacts gain meaning beyond their material form. The coin's display reflects this duality. It's presented alongside Wabanaki artifacts, not as an intruder but as a guest, a silent participant in a much longer, richer story than any documentary could capture. Whether it's a Viking relic or an indigenous heirloom depends less on the coin itself and more on who's holding the magnifying glass. That's the magic of the Maine Penny. It doesn't just belong to history. It belongs to everyone who's ever looked at it and seen a reflection of their own curiosity staring back. The Maine Penny isn't just a relic, it's a mirror reflecting back the limits of what we think we know. For all our tools and technology, history remains a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and this tiny silver disc forces us to confront that gap head-on. Archaeologists, historians, and even enthusiasts often crave neat narratives, timelines that snap into place like Lego bricks, but the penny refuses to comply. It dangles between certainty and mystery, reminding us that the past isn't a closed book but a conversation, one where new voices can still append the story. Consider how quickly assumptions unravel when faced with an anomaly like this. For decades, the mainstream narrative insisted Norse exploration in North America began and ended in Newfoundland. Then along comes a coin that shouldn't exist where it was found, and suddenly, the map of Viking voyages looks less like a finished drawing and more like a sketch with erased edges. The penny teaches us that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found more Viking artifacts in Maine doesn't mean they weren't there. It might mean we haven't looked in the right places, or that time and tide have swallowed the clues. This humility extends to how we interpret indigenous histories too. The Wabanaki people's oral traditions have long spoken of distant trade and far-reaching connections, yet for centuries Western scholars dismissed these accounts as myth. The Maine Penny, nestled among indigenous artifacts, quietly vindicates those stories. It's proof that native trade networks were vast and sophisticated, capable of moving objects across continents without European intermediaries. The coin challenges us to listen more closely to voices we've historically sidelined, to recognize that written records aren't the only way history speaks. Yet the penny's greatest lesson might be about patience. In an era of instant answers, it defies easy categorization. Is it proof of Vikings in Maine? A testament to indigenous trade, a hoax, a fluke? The truth might be all or none of these, and that's okay. Archaeology isn't a sprint to conclusions. It's a slow, meticulous dance with ambiguity. Every shovel of earth could reveal a revelation or deepen the mystery. The Maine Penny, humble as it is, forces us to sit with that uncertainty, to resist the urge to force the past into tidy boxes. Perhaps that's why this artifact endures in our imagination. It's not just a piece of metal, it's a question mark cast in silver, a reminder that history's most compelling stories are often the ones that refuse to end. As long as the penny sits in its museum case, quietly defying expectations, it invites us to keep digging, keep wondering, and above all, stay open to the possibility that the next discovery could rewrite everything we thought we knew. Modern technology could finally crack the Maine Penny's stubborn mystery wide open, so why hasn't it? Imagine subjecting that tiny silver disc to hyperspectral imaging, a technique that peers beneath centuries of corrosion to reveal hidden markings or wear patterns invisible to the naked eye. Or consider isotopic analysis, which traces the metal's unique chemical fingerprint back to the exact Scandinavian mine it came from, potentially linking it to known Norse trade routes. Even environmental DNA lifted from soil clinging to its surface might detect microscopic traces of its handlers, whether Viking sailors or Wabanaki traders. Tools like these have revolutionized archaeology, unmasking forgeries and confirming authentic artifacts with near-surgical precision. Yet the Maine Penny sits quietly in its museum case, its secret still intact. The delay isn't for lack of interest. Researchers face a delicate balancing act. Every test risks damaging the coin, however minimally. Non-invasive methods like 3D laser scanning are safe but limited. They can't analyze composition or subsurface details. More revealing techniques, such as scraping microscopic samples for metallurgical testing, require sacrificing a sliver of history for a one-of-a-kind artifact. That's a gamble. It's like asking to shave a fleck off the Mona Lisa to verify the paint. One conservator admitted, the penny's small size magnifies the problem. There's barely enough material to study without erasing it entirely. Then there's the question of funding. Cutting-edge science doesn't come cheap. A full battery of tests, neutron activation analysis, synchrotron radiation, maybe even particle accelerator scans, could cost tens of thousands of dollars. For a small state museum, that's a hard sell when the payoff is uncertain. We'd need a smoking gun level of discovery to justify the expense, explained a Maine State Museum curator. Unlike high-profile projects like analyzing King Tut's dagger or the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Maine Penny lacks the glamour to attract big grants. It's caught in a catch-22. Without definitive proof of its significance, it struggles to secure the tools that could provide it. Perhaps the biggest hurdle is the academic divide. Many Norse specialists focused on undisputed sites like Eland's Meadows see the penny as a distracting outlier. It's not that we don't care, said a prominent Viking archaeologist, but our resources go where the evidence is overwhelming. Meanwhile, indigenous scholars rightfully prioritize research that centers native histories over European narratives. Squeezing budgets mean every dollar spent chasing Vikings in Maine is a dollar not spent documenting Wabanaki trade networks or language preservation. The penny's unresolved status leaves it stranded between disciplines, everyone's curiosity piqued but no one's priority list. Yet hope isn't lost. Quietly, behind the scenes, new collaborations are forming. A team from the University of Maine recently proposed a compromise: combine non-destructive X-ray fluorescence scans with machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of medieval Norse coins. The goal: identify subtle wear patterns that might hint at the penny's journey, whether it circulated for decades in Scandinavia before crossing the Atlantic or shows signs of being carried in a pouch for long distances. Another group is exploring environmental DNA analysis of the soil layer where it was found, hunting for pollen grains or microbes that could reveal climate conditions when it was buried. The clock is ticking, though. Every year, the coin's surfaces oxidize further, potentially obscuring crucial details. Advances in technology also race ahead. Methods considered cutting-edge today might be obsolete tomorrow, leaving half-finished studies in their wake. The Maine Penny's window for answers may be narrowing just as the tools to unlock them reach maturity. Until then, it remains frozen in limbo, a riddle wrapped in silver, waiting for science to catch up to its story. What's tantalizing isn't just what we might learn, but who gets to decide when the pursuit of knowledge outweighs the risks. Because sometimes history's biggest revelations come from asking not just can we, but should we. Long before archaeologists brushed the dirt from the Maine Penny, whispers of strange visitors haunted the foggy coves and pine forests of coastal Maine. Local Wabanaki oral traditions tell of mysterious figures appearing along the shore, tall, light-eyed people unlike any neighboring tribe. The Penobscot speak of the stone Yunkuak, a word some translate as stone canoe people, describing strangers who arrived in vessels unlike their own birchbark canoes. These accounts, passed down for generations, describe encounters with pale-skinned traders offering metal tools or unusual fabrics before vanishing as suddenly as they came. Could these fragments of memory preserve fleeting contact with Norse explorers centuries ago? The legends grow richer near places like Penobscot Bay, where fishermen still swap tales of ghost ships glimpsed through the mist, long, low silhouettes with high prows, nothing like the colonial schooners that came later. One persistent story from the 1920s describes a lobsterman hauling up a strange piece of woodwork near Naskeag Point, its mortise and tenon joints matching Norse shipbuilding techniques. Though the artifact was lost, the description aligns eerily with Viking ship fragments found in Scandinavia. Even the landscape holds clues. A rocky promontory near Cape Elizabeth was once called Norumbega by early European mapmakers, a name some linguists link to Old Norse terms for northern settlement. European settlers added their own layers to the lore. In the 1800s, Maine farmers plowing fields near the Kennebec River occasionally turned up rusted iron implements unlike any colonial tools, their designs curiously reminiscent of Viking Age artifacts. Newspapers of the time dismissed them as hoaxes, but modern metallurgy tells a different story. Some show slag patterns consistent with medieval Norse ironworking. One particularly compelling find was a broken spearhead unearthed near Bath in 1904, its tapering shape and welded iron construction mirroring weapons from 10th century Norway. Unlike the Maine Penny, these objects rarely made it to museums, often discarded as curiosities or melted down for scrap. The most haunting echoes of these legends come from Micmac territory further north, where elders recount a story of Guy Mellgren, a legendary figure described as a red-haired giant who taught their ancestors to build weirs and traps. While some anthropologists argue this could reflect early contact with Basque or Celtic fishermen, others note the parallels to Norse descriptions of skraelings, their term for indigenous peoples they encountered in Vinland. The sagas mention copper-haired traders, possibly referring to blonde indigenous individuals, or was it the other way around? Could these stories be distorted memories of actual Norse visitors, their features and technology burned into oral tradition? What's striking isn't just the persistence of these tales, but their specificity. Unlike generic white god myths found across the Americas, the northeastern stories focus on practical details, metalworking, ship designs, trade goods, that align surprisingly well with known Viking capabilities. A Passamaquoddy story collected in the 1890s describes strangers who made fire from stones, possibly referencing Norse strike-a-lights, while a Maliseet legend mentions knives that never dulled, echoing the superior edge-holding of Norse steel. Even the timing fits. Dendrochronology from Norse Greenland shows a surge in timber imports around the 1100s, exactly when the Maine Penny was minted, and when these encounters might have occurred. Yet separating history from myth remains treacherous. Folklorists caution that oral traditions evolve, absorbing elements from later European contact. The blonde-haired giants could reflect encounters with Basque whalers in the 1500s, or even Scandinavian immigrants in the 1800s. But the consistency of certain details, like the stone canoe motif appearing independently in Wabanaki and Micmac stories, suggests deeper roots. The Maine Penny's discovery at a documented indigenous trade hub gives these legends new weight, offering a physical anchor for what was once dismissed as fantasy. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between archaeology and campfire tales. Whether the Stonyunkuak were Norse explorers, indigenous traders carrying foreign goods, or something else entirely, their legacy endures in the rock carvings along Machias Bay spirals and ship-like shapes that resemble Viking petroglyphs, and in the stubborn refusal of these stories to fade. Like the penny itself, they are fragments of a puzzle we're still piecing together, reminding us that history isn't just written in books, but whispered in the wind off the North Atlantic. The discovery of the Maine Penny doesn't just shine a light on history, it forces us to ask a far more difficult question: who gets to claim it? Museums label artifacts as Norse or Wabanaki, but what happens when an object's journey blurs those categories? This tiny silver disc was forged in Scandinavia, buried by indigenous hands, and now sits in a state museum. So whose story does it truly tell? The debate over its ownership isn't just academic, it's a microcosm of the global struggle to reconcile colonial histories with indigenous sovereignty. Some argue the penny is undeniably Norse. Its design, metal composition, and origin point squarely to medieval Norway. Under this view, it belongs to the broader narrative of Viking exploration, a physical trace of their reach beyond Vinland. Scandinavian cultural organizations have occasionally requested loans of the coin for exhibits, framing it as a shared Nordic heritage. But this perspective overlooks a crucial truth: the penny didn't cross the Atlantic alone. It entered Wabanaki history the moment it was traded, kept, or lost at Naskeag Point. For the Penobscot, it's not just a Viking relic, it's evidence of their ancestors' far-reaching networks and choices. This isn't theoretical. Indigenous communities worldwide have fought for decades to reclaim artifacts taken from their lands, from sacred objects to ancestral remains. The Maine Penny's case is murkier. No one took it from the Wabanaki. It was excavated legally by archaeologists, but the underlying tension remains. Should indigenous voices lead the conversation about an artifact found on their ancestral territory, even if its origins lie elsewhere? Some tribal historians, like Jikaistanamug, argue the coin's real significance lies in its final context. It's not about who made it, he said, but about whose hands it passed through last, whose earth cradled it. Then there's the compromise view that the penny represents a rare moment of shared heritage. Norse artifacts in North America are vanishingly rare. Wabanaki sites with European materials predating Columbus even more so. Perhaps the coin's power lies in its duality, a bridge between worlds that history often paints as separate. This approach resonates in collaborative exhibits where the penny is displayed alongside indigenous trade goods, emphasizing connection over conquest. Yet collaboration requires acknowledging painful asymmetries. While Norway has countless Viking artifacts, the Wabanaki have far fewer surviving pre-contact objects, making the Maine Penny disproportionately precious to their cultural narrative. Repatriation debates often hinge on this imbalance: who benefits more from holding the artifact and who bears the cost of losing it. For now, the coin remains at the Maine State Museum, but the conversation continues. Some tribal leaders advocate for co-stewardship, where Wabanaki historians help interpret the penny's display, ensuring their perspective isn't an afterthought. The ethical knots tighten when we consider why this debate feels so urgent. Artifacts like the Maine Penny aren't just clues to the past, they shape how we understand identity today. For Scandinavia, it's proof of Viking daring. For the Wabanaki, it's a testament to resilience and adaptability. Both stories matter, but museums have historically prioritized one over the other. Deciding where the penny belongs isn't just about labeling a display case, it's about deciding whose history gets centered, whose voices get heard, and ultimately, who controls the narrative of this continent's past. The coin itself might be silent, but the questions it raises echo louder than ever. The Maine Penny's enigma won't be solved by staring at its tarnished surface, it demands action. Imagine deploying ground-penetrating radar along Maine's coastline, scanning for the faint outlines of Norse-style hearths or post holes hidden beneath centuries of soil. Targeted excavations near the Goddard site could reveal secondary trade hubs where similar artifacts might lurk, just waiting to shift the narrative from anomaly to pattern. But it's not just about digging deeper, it's about digging smarter. Modern isotopic analysis could trace the coin's silver back to its source mine in Norway, mapping its route through Greenland settlements or indigenous trade networks. Even microscopic residue clinging to its edges, traces of ancient fingerprints, fabric, or soil, might reveal whether it spent time in a Viking pouch or a Wabanaki medicine bundle. Linguistics offers another tantalizing path forward. Scholars could re-examine Wabanaki and Micmac oral histories with fresh ears, hunting for loanwords or distorted Norse terms that might hint at forgotten encounters. The Algonquian word for metal, for example, shows curious similarities to Old Norse terms in some dialects. Could this linguistic echo reflect early contact? Meanwhile, comparative studies of indigenous and Norse tool marks on traded objects might distinguish between direct Viking exchanges and gradual relay-style trade. A single coin can't tell us who carried it, but the wear patterns on its edges might whisper whether it changed hands in a single dramatic meeting or passed quietly through generations of coastal traders. The ocean itself holds clues waiting to be decoded. Underwater archaeologists are now surveying Maine's submerged coastal areas where rising seas may have swallowed potential Viking landing sites. Shipworms decompose wooden hulls quickly in these waters, but stone ballast or metal rivets could endure. A single Norse anchor stock or fishing weight found near the Goddard site would reshape the debate overnight. Even without new artifacts, advanced climate models could reconstruct 11th century wind and current patterns, testing whether a storm could realistically blow a Viking ship from Newfoundland to Maine, or if such a journey required deliberate navigation. Technology's greatest gift might be its ability to connect disparate dots. A multinational research team could cross-reference Norse sagas with indigenous oral histories, layered over geographic data to identify overlapping accounts of coastal landmarks. Imagine pinpointing a place where both traditions describe a skirmish near a distinctive rock formation or a cove where pale traders anchored. Citizen science could play a role too, crowdsourcing analysis of satellite imagery for subtle soil discoloration that hints at buried structures, or encouraging beachcombers to scan shores with metal detectors for companion artifacts. The stakes go beyond academic curiosity. Every new clue, or lack thereof, forces us to confront the biases in how we frame history. If future digs uncover more Norse material in Wabanaki sites, does that narrative center Viking explorers or indigenous trade power? The answer depends on who's holding the trowel. Collaborative excavations led by tribal archaeologists alongside Norse specialists could reframe the search entirely, prioritizing questions that matter to descendant communities rather than colonial curiosities. After all, the Maine Penny's real value isn't in proving who got there first, but in revealing how deeply entangled our histories have always been, and how much we still stand to learn when we listen to the land, the legends, and each other. The Maine Penny lingers in our collective imagination not because it offers answers, but precisely because it doesn't. This unassuming silver disc, small enough to balance on your fingertip, has become one of archaeology's most tantalizing loose threads, pulling at the seams of history's neatly woven narratives. For every expert convinced it's proof of Norse explorers venturing beyond Vinland, another counters with equally compelling evidence of indigenous trade networks stretching farther than we ever imagined. The truth may forever hover just out of reach, obscured by centuries of tide and time. What makes this coin extraordinary isn't just its journey across an ocean, but how it exposes the gaps in our understanding of the past. History isn't a solved puzzle, it's a living conversation, constantly reshaped by new discoveries and shifting perspectives. The Maine Penny forces us to confront how much we still don't know about the connections between continents and cultures long before Columbus. It whispers of possibilities, a storm-tossed Viking ship blown off course, a chance meeting between Norse traders and Wabanaki hunters, or perhaps a relay of exchanges spanning generations and thousands of miles. The scenarios are endless, each more fascinating than the last. This is why we chase mysteries like these, not to reduce history to simple headlines, but to revel in its beautiful complexity. Every unanswered question invites us to look closer, to reconsider what we thought we knew. The penny's silent testimony reminds us that the past was as messy and unpredictable as our present, full of chance encounters and quiet moments that never made it into the official record. For all our technology and scholarship, sometimes a single artifact can still append everything. So where does that leave us? Perhaps the real power of the Maine Penny lies in its ability to spark curiosity rather than certainty. It challenges us to stay open to possibilities, to question the stories we've been told, and to wonder about all the histories still waiting to be uncovered beneath our feet. The next time you walk a beach or browse a museum, remember, you might be standing where worlds once collided, where fragments of forgotten encounters still linger just below the surface. What's your theory? Do you think this coin sailed here in a Viking longship or traveled slowly through indigenous hands? Could there be other Norse artifacts hidden along New England's coast, or is this solitary silver disc destined to remain history's most compelling outlier? The conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to uncover the next clue that changes everything we thought we knew.